Hello and welcome to Blockchain Futurist Conference. I have a pleasure to speak with Amber Scott from Outlier, a compliance platform. And I know it's not an easy topic to talk to, but Amber is a perfect person to talk about the topic. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, compliance is always kind of a very difficult topic, a little bit sticky, right? Nobody wants to talk about it, and yet every single person who is interested in the business, particularly in startup business, needs to face it.
Fair. No one wants to talk about it, but also no one wants to wear an orange jumpsuit against their will. And so I think it's important that we have these conversations. And also, no one wants to facilitate fraud. So no one wants to be the exchange or the platform that's allowing all of the fraud and scams to happen. So none of us like fraud and scams.
Yes.
And I think those things go hand in hand.
Yes, there was like many companies which started to pay attention to the idea only, developing of the product or some platform, not paying attention to governance, to the compliance. And later on, they've been surprised that they've been shut down and they needed to fix it, everything.
Wow.
So the thing is with the compliance that it has to be acknowledged, as you mentioned. So when we are talking about companies which are starting right now, or even mid-sized companies, what are kind of the key points in which they have to pay attention to?
So I think the first step is always really understanding what applies to you. So what are the regulations? What are the laws based on my idea? And it's going to be different based on different ideas. But what are the things that apply to you? It's also going to be different based on where you're doing business. So if I'm in a company in Canada, if my customers are in Canada, that's a different context than if I'm in China and my customers are in China.
Right.
So you really have to understand what's at play in all of the regions where you are, where your customers are, and all of those things are going to be really important. And then depending on your specific implementation, you might have to pay attention to securities laws. You might have to pay attention to laws around energy. You might have to pay attention to banking laws and financial services laws. Privacy laws, in most iterations, you have to pay attention to. You might have to pay attention to anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing laws. And the more you're thinking about these things as you're building, the better it is. Because if you're building with these things in mind, if you're building something that's going to work for what you need to do, you don't have to go back and rework it. It's always really difficult when you say, you know what, I have this platform, it's great, it's ready to ship, and oh, shoot. All of a sudden, I've realized that there's this thing called anti-money laundering or AML, and I have to do this KYC and know your customer, and I haven't built anything for that. So I don't know how to keep it. I don't know how to secure it. I don't know how to store it. I don't even know what data points I need. And we were planning to ship tomorrow, and now maybe we'll ship 6 months from now because we have to understand this whole thing.
Yes.
So, and worse than that is realizing after you've already shipped, oh shoot, I just got a letter from this regulator that seems very cross with me, and now I have to stop what I'm doing, or now I have to give the money back. That's never what we want the answer to be.
So I think everything has started when it comes to innovative technologies, because we know there are industries which are already established and they are following those rules and regulations, and many rules of regulations have been established for them. When it comes to innovative technologies, what has been so attractive about them, it was like the first thing: no regulations, no compliance, freedom. And then, we've been facing a lot of issues because of that. When we're talking about those innovative technologies, one of the attractive things also was everything is borderless.
And that's hard. Technology is instant and it's global. And regulation is slow. It's slow to change, and it's very local, and it's different from place to place. So while we have some overarching principles and intergovernmental bodies that work, like the Financial Action Task Force and anti-money laundering, so there are principles and guidance that apply to all different countries, but each country implements that in terms of their laws differently.
Yes, so Right now, we also tapping into digitalization, digital ID. Do you think that that technology might actually help to ease up some regulatory issues or compliance issues to facilitate and accommodate like easy transfer of information and data?
Yes, I think digital ID is a big part of it. I love seeing the efforts that various countries have made in that regard. I think the world has become digital, and so we need ways to identify ourselves, to authenticate ourselves. And I love some of the innovation that's happening in this space in terms of privacy preserving technologies
Right.
that are saying, do you really need to know my birth date, or do you just need to know that I'm over 19?
Exactly.
And so what parts of my data do I really need to expose to do this particular transaction?
That is actually a fantastic point. How many times have you been asked, about your birthday or the place you've been born? Like certain things which are truly irrelevant because they can be generalized
Mhm.
and unified when it comes to that information and transfer of information.
Absolutely, but there are also times where what companies are required to collect is very specific. And so if I'm buying a bottle of wine, you need to know that I'm of the right age to buy a bottle of wine. But if I'm applying for a financial service product, that company actually is required to collect, generally speaking, my name and address and date of birth, possibly my occupation, probably the reason that I'm doing business with that company. So there's all these little nitty gritty data points that these exchanges and other companies aren't collecting because they want to. They're not collecting out of a sense of surveillance capitalism, although often doesn't get used that way
Yes.
sometimes. But there really are requirements that say, here are the specific data points that we need to collect. And they need to know how to maintain those. They need to know how to secure those. They need to know how to keep those things up to date.
What are the most controversial regulatory issues when it comes to it? The ones which possibly even haltering or like delaying implementation of innovative technologies.
I'm sure that people have a lot of strong opinions on those, but there isn't a regulation that I'm aware of in the history of regulation that exists for the purpose of hindering technology. This isn't why regulators regulate. It isn't what they set out to do. They set out to do things like protecting consumers. They set out to do things like preventing fraud, detecting and deterring money laundering and terrorist financing. This isn't to say that those things don't have unintentional consequences, and they do. As a practitioner in the anti-money laundering space, one of the hardest things for me is seeing how these rules like KYC that are really intended to make sure that the companies know who they're dealing with and that they can prevent financial crime are also hindering some of the most vulnerable sectors of the population from accessing financial services products or accessing financial services products at a reasonable rate, a rate that you and I would enjoy as relatively affluent people. And so that I think is problematic. But as companies, as businesses, we always have to think about things in two channels. And so one of them is, what's the rule set that I have today? So what's my sandbox? Where can I play? What rules do I have to follow? And I want to stay in business. I want to be profitable. I want to have a good reputation. I want to fight financial crime to the degree that I can. So I'm going to do those things. But where I notice that the regulation is problematic or that we could do it better, I should also be interacting with my regulators. I should be educating my regulators. I should be running risk-based pilots if I can do that, so that I'm still following the rules, but I'm testing other rule sets that I could be doing and really showing that proof. Because I think that's a big part of it, to say, right now we do A, B, and C, and it's not really doing what we wanted to do. But if we were doing D, E, and F, we could meet those goals. So I understand the goals of the regulation. I know how we can meet those goals by changing some of the things that we're doing and being more effective in that. And I think that's a much more productive discussion. But I think as industry, it's our job to do that education. And regulators are eager for those dialogues. It's not always a one-to-one. So just because you say something to a regulator doesn't mean they'll do it. But they're interested in the conversations with industry. They're interested in the real world effects. And there are often very specific channels to do that, which is to say that when regulations get posted, they're usually, in Canada anyway, posted in draft, and people can submit comments on it. But you have to submit your comments. If it's a Department of Finance regulation, to the Department of Finance email. I can't just post a comment on Reddit that says, here's how I think this would be better, and expect that the Department of Finance is now going to read my Reddit comment and respond to that. So you have to go to them. You have to go to their channels that they have open for those types of comments.
So you have to open the dialogue. So Amber, when the companies are starting, like for startups, or the ones which are already in certain development, like what are the 3 key points they always have to pay attention when it comes to the compliance? I know there's more, but at least let's stick to those 3 basic ones which the companies truly have to follow to be compliant.
I think know the laws that apply to you. So know what your business model is. What's your product? What's your service? And what applies to that? Know where your market is. So where are you incorporated? Where are your consumers? And it doesn't fly to just say, well, it's just on the internet, so I don't have to know where your customers are. Your customers exist somewhere in meat space, and you have to know about that. And then I think knowing the risk. So part of that is, if I'm looking at a particular market, if I'm looking at a particular consumer segment, what's the risk of dealing with that segment? And really thinking about it from a risk perspective. And if you can do those 3 things, you're probably in a really good place.
Super. So at least, those companies can actually focus on themselves, see it, and based on that, make a decision what path of compliance they really need to follow, based on those at least 3 points, and then the rest, that's to the compliance officer and the lawyers.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Amber. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you for sharing your valuable knowledge and information with us, with the Blockchain Futurist Conference audience and the ones who are going to see us around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.